Hi friends. How are you? How is everybody? Hello, Dolores. Good evening to you. And good evening, Kay. Great to see you. And Lana, hi. And Lana, you're on both places, Facebook and YouTube. Wow. Carmen, hello. Bonnie says howdy to Lana. Bonnie says hi, everyone. So, there's a lot to cover here tonight, so I'm going to just get started. But please tell me if my sound's okay, by the way. I'm going to start off with some current news and go through that as fast as I can. And then I'm going to get into the main topic of the evening, which is getting around the iron law, of oligarchy. So if you can let me know by commenting how my sound is, I'll appreciate that. I'm going to start by sharing the screen again. Okay, so things are, of course, very active right now in relation to charges flying back and forth on Capitol Hill. Things have gotten to the point, where Kevin McCarthy is getting hit pretty hard. The minority leader who just lost the speaker election by 216 to 209, only 7 votes. Headline from the Common Dream staff: Kevin McCarthy must resign, quote unquote. The House minority leader under fire for enabling Trump's, quote, worst and most destructive acts, unquote. Charges by Don Beyer, who used to be my representative here when I lived in the Virginia 8th. I now live in the Virginia 10th. But he was my representative for a short while. The House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, is being urged to stop down for having spread the very lies, quote unquote, that fueled the Wednesday attack on the U.S. Capitol in his repeated enabling of President Trump's worst and most destructive acts. In a Twitter thread Saturday, today, of course, Don Beyer, who, as I said, is in the Virginia 8th and is a Democrat, laid out the case against McCarthy, Republican of California, key figure in blocking Americans getting $2,000 relief checks, who's backed GOP efforts to overturn the election results. Beyer wrote in his tweet, quote, Kevin McCarthy should resign, unquote. While Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley should face accountability for their roles in fueling the Capitol siege, as Senator Patty Murray and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have urged, Kevin McCarthy has more to answer for, said Don Beyer. Hawley and Cruz deserve to be held accountable, but they are backbenchers, Beyer tweeted. What Kevin McCarthy did was just as bad, but he is the minority leader. Quote, every House Republican voted to make him Speaker. When he led his caucus into an attack on our democracy, 2/3 followed him, said Beyer. He embraced and empowered the worst conspiracy theorists in his caucus. He spread the very lies that helped incite this violence. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Trump in trying to destroy our democracy. He always enables Trump's worst and most destructive acts, unquote. Bayer further accused McCarthy of echoing, quote, Trump's incendiary lies and dehumanizing attacks on political opponents, and rejected as false, quote, his claims to oppose division, unquote. No Bayer added, quote, Kevin McCarthy must resign, unquote. It's not just Democrats expressing frustration with McCarthy's recent actions. As Politico reported today, Kevin McCarthy, as well as the minority whip of the House, Steve Scalise, are causing frustration in anonymous Republicans because McCarthy and Scalise, quote, failed to show leadership in a time of crisis and should have done more to call out Trump for his role in the riots that left 5 people dead, unquote. Now, this kind of attack, okay, and just in general recriminations, were down to follow because the House, where these people sit and work, was attacked by the people who came on January 6th and who broke in and who were threatening the safety of the Congress people, or at least the Congress people perceived that they were threatening their safety. And of course, a lot of evidence has surfaced since that they probably intended, the people who broke in probably intended to threaten the safety of certain Congress people. So it was a sure thing that some of the House was going to be hurling charges at other people in the House who were supportive of Trump, who had been whipping up the kind of people who came to the House and who came to the Senate, came to the Capitol on January 6th. So it was a sure thing this was going to happen. That is to say, the minority in the House was playing with fire when they continued to support Trump so strongly and continued to stand up for his claims that the election was somehow fraudulent. When they supported him so strongly and refused to concede for so long a time, okay, in Kevin McCarthy's case, he only recently made a statement in a Friday statement. He acknowledged for the first time that Joe Biden will assume office this month. And that was the first time. That was easily a month and a half too late. Now, it's true, okay, Mitch McConnell was also late, but not as late, okay, as Kevin McCarthy. He should have taken his signals from Mitch at that time and said, okay, it's over. There was no purpose other than a political purpose in continuing to play ball with Trump. Doing so was very irresponsible and very ignoble. And it definitely led to what happened on January 6th. Because there was no social pressure on Trump from his own party for him to concede, or at least very little social pressure for him to concede. So the people came to Washington on the 6th, his people, totally convinced that they had to stop the steal. They were incited to think in that way by Trump. And his collaborators were those people in Congress. So now the other side is now after them and is saying, you have to get out. You were disloyal to this House. You were disloyal to your colleagues that you work with each day. You were in effect supporting a coup against the Congress. Right up until the 6th. So that's basically what happened there. And that's basically why people are starting to hurl these charges back and forth. So let's look briefly at another one. This is also from Common Dreams, and it's by it was written by Andrea Germanus, their staff writer. It's 176 House members back article of impeachment. The watchdog says, quote, the future of American democracy is on the line, unquote. Excuse me. Representative David Cicilline said Saturday, 176 House members have now backed his resolution to impeach that accuses President Donald Trump of, quote, incitement to insurrection, unquote. He drafted the article with Ted Lieu of California and Jamie Raskin, of Maryland. It centers on Trump's Wednesday comments, but to the crowd in front of the White House that encouraged and foreseeably resulted in imminent lawless action at the Capitol, and that interfered with the congressional certification of the presidential election results. Now, I have to note here there are some people who disagree with this, who point out that the White House is 4 miles away from the Capitol down Pennsylvania Avenue, and that the people hearing the president would not have had time to actually get to the Capitol by the time the mob violence started to occur there, because it takes more than 20 minutes or so to go 4 miles. Even at a brisk walk, it takes more than 20 minutes. And reporters on the scene have said that only 20 minutes later there was already a mob at the Capitol trying to push its way in. So there are some people who disagree that his comments to the extremist mob encouraged and foreseeably resulted in the actions at the Capitol. I think I would say to that, I don't know whether the Wednesday comments triggered it, but I know Trump had been talking to his people for quite a long period of time to try to get them to come to the Capitol on January 6th and disrupt the counting of the electoral votes. So I'm not sure whether his comments on Wednesday were the trigger. He was triggering people every day, is basically the situation. And that's why these people came to Washington in the first place. Anyway, the remarks from Trump on that day were consistent with his prior efforts to subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. And, quote again, he will remain a threat to national security, democracy, and the Constitution if he's allowed to remain in office. I entirely agree with that. He will remain a threat. He certainly cannot be trusted with the nuclear codes, as people have been saying. Now, I never thought he could be trusted with the codes. That was one of the big dangers in having him, as president. But certainly, as we get to the end of the road here, and he sees nothing but destruction in front of him, I think he becomes far more dangerous in terms of trying to pull the house down around him. There were some other articles of impeachment. Some articles were actually released by Ilhan Ilhan Omar. A new polling on Friday shows 57% of Americans in favor of the removal of Donald Trump. But Nancy Pelosi is trying to get him to resign. She says the hope of members that the president will immediately resign. But if he does not, I have instructed the Rules Committee to be prepared to move forward with Congressman Jamie Raskin's 25th Amendment legislation and a motion for impeachment. And accordingly, she said, the House will preserve every option, including the 25th Amendment, a motion to impeach, or a privileged resolution for impeachment. That last is a resolution that can pass very quickly and be sent up to the Senate. And of course, there are progressive Democrats urging the chamber to move with greater urgency and to swiftly reconvene. And apparently, they're going to reconvene on Monday because apparently Mike Pence is opposed to invoking the 25th Amendment, and there have been a number of resignations from Trump's cabinet from people who want to avoid having to commit to the 25th Amendment. They just rather leave because it's a no-win situation for them. If they vote for the 25th, people are going to blame them because they deserted Trump. If they vote against invoking the 25th, then everybody else is going to blame them for not invoking the 25th. So some of them, such as Elaine Chao, who's the wife of Mitch McConnell, and also Betsy DeVos, are simply running away from the situation so they don't get anybody angry. In a letter led by Rashida Tlaib to congressional leaders, lawmakers said even the small window of time before President-elect Joe Biden takes office, quote, may prove to be detrimental to our nation. Every day that Trump remains in office is a serious threat to our democracy and our national security. So that's what people are saying. Of course, if the House impeaches him quickly, let's say by Tuesday, or by Monday night, it goes over to the Senate. But Tuesday, there's no telling how long it will take or whether it's even going to get through the Senate. Maybe Mitch is just going to pigeonhole it again. But there's danger in that. There's danger in that because there are a majority of people now in favor of impeachment, and the Republicans stand to lose if they block an impeachment vote. So from a pure politics point of view, it's in the interest of the Democrats to quickly pass impeachment and to call basically for law and order and the punishment of Donald Trump. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on Mitch to go that way, even though, of course, he wants to avoid the situation as well. I don't know if the public is going to stand. I don't know if he can escape blame for the Republican Party if he fails to take a stand on it. Lisa Murkowski has already said, I want Trump to resign. I want him out because he's caused enough damage. There are some who think that this is a first move, of Lisa Murkowski's in simply leaving the Republican Party and becoming, an independent, and eventually becoming a Democrat. This may be significant for another reason, which I'll go into in a very brief time. So that, is that one. There's a longer piece concerning the events of the 6th, which I think we ought to take a look at because it's a very well done piece. So that was another part of my current news focus for tonight. This is an article from Thomas Neuberger, who also writes under the pseudonym of Gaius Publius. He's a great writer. This one is on his blog on Substack called God Spies. And it's called About Last Night, and it was written on the 8th. And he has the graphics here, that appeared in a tweet by Ben Smith at BD6Smith, who says the aesthetics of this ride are incredible. It's like the storming of the Bastille as recreated by the cast of National Lampoon's Animal House. These photos will outlive us all. And so there are the guys. Once I wrote an article where the slogan basically rioting for fun and profit appeared. I think for many of the people who engage in this particular riot, I don't know about any profit involved in it, but it was certainly rioting for fun. They were having fun, in part. They were taking pictures and selfies, and so. Anyway, Tom Neuberger says a large number of electrons will be spilled over the event at the Capitol, the riot, the insurrection, the performative acting out. However, one wants to see it through whatever lens one wants to see it through. I may be one of those spilling them. But today, I want to make a few preliminary points. First, it appears the police invited the rioters in. And then he goes to a video, which I'm not going to play, but it's very famous. It's of the cops moving the gates back so the rioters could come on to the Capitol grounds. And why let them on the Capitol grounds? Who knows? People have theories. I'm not going to say they're conspiracy theories. But Tom goes to Joy Reid, who says had a righteous rant on MSNBC as the events were unfolding, making the unvarnished point that white right-wing protesters know, quote, the cops are with them, unquote. And he said, this is my paraphrase, In that context, he says the video is stark and damning. All praise on her for that. No punches pulled at all. Why might this reliable Democratic Party defender have been tempted to pull her punches? Read on, he says. This point that the cops are aligned with the rioters needs a full exploration in the days ahead. The nation needs to confront the fact that, in fact, police as an institution are a right-wing force. I couldn't agree more with that. We have to confront that fact, and we have to change the police. We have to make sure that they are impartial, that they are no longer a right-wing force. And if that involves firing half of them, I think that's what has to be done. If Democrats attempted to soften and hide this fact in mistaken, quote, centrist, unquote, loyalty to violent agents of the state, they often excuse, it will tar them further in the eyes of those who see the obvious truth. That will not only be morally wrong, it will have electoral consequences. Democratic leaders are already flirting with disaster on that front. Now, that is one opinion. There are other people who think that this whole riot at the Capitol is going to reflect very, very negatively on the Republican Party and cause it to lose support, especially in the suburbs, because they think it will have made clear that the Republicans are not at all the party of law, and order, but the party of riot, and ruin. Which, of course, has been the truth for a very, very long time. But, of course, the American public has never perceived it because of the superior propaganda of the Republican Party. Second, there must be a response, or this will become normalized, just as this explosion was normalized by events like the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000. That was the riot that was started and implemented by many Republicans in Brooks Brothers suits in Florida to try to end the counting in the Florida election of 2000. And it had a vital role in bringing the Supreme Court in and causing the Supreme Court to end the counting. The Brooks Brothers riot was successful. And there's evidence that some people now sitting on the Supreme Court were involved in the Brooks Brothers riot in 2000. Wonderful reward, right? That's what happens when you allow a moral hazard situation, to develop. You actually get the lawless people administering the law. The response should take several forms. Ayanna Pressley has called for the immediate impeachment of the president. And Tom says, this is correct. Trump should have been impeached on day one for his violations of the Emoluments Clause. I've, of course, said this myself for months now. And he says, I wrote about the need for that impeachment here. And then he says, and he should be impeached now. This started, never forget, with a late morning speech that same day at which Trump instructed a crowd of his supporters to take their grievances to the Capitol building. So again, there's difference of opinion about that. Some who were covering it at the Capitol think that people who weren't at the Trump talk were already at the Capitol and already had started a riot at the Capitol. That has to be clarified. I'm not sure what exactly the facts were with respect to this. Maybe Jordan Chariton, who was there, will be able to clarify the sequence of this himself. Calling the outcomes of the election, quote, this egregious assault on our democracy, Trump said his supporters should, quote, walk down to the Capitol, unquote. Quote, we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, quote unquote, he continued, and quote again, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them because he will never take back our country with weakness, unquote. So whether he was urging people to violence there is not so much specifically what he said. That could be interpreted as just going down to the Capitol and getting into the gallery and cheering for the Congresspeople who were supporting the position of Trump and booing the Congresspeople who were for just accepting the electoral votes as they had been certified. Now, he might have only have been saying that, but you have to look at the broader context. And the broader context suggested that he hoped for something that was going to disrupt the counting of the vote and maybe booby trap it so it would never happen. I think that the context does suggest that this was his intention. But this can be disputed. When bad deeds go unpunished, they become permitted. This deed will become permitted if it's not addressed with force. Okay, and immediate impeachment counts as force, and failing to address it with force counts as cowardice at best and complicity in future similar events at worst. I have to agree with that. This is another trap that the Democratic leaders may easily fall into, yes, because they are notoriously so gutless at so many things. Security state media conduit, David Ignatius, has made an additional point as these events unfolded, that Trump must be sealed off from power to keep him from doing even greater harm. This too is correct. It must be done, however, in constitutional ways, not by staff disobedience or in-house insurrection. That too would set a terrible precedent. Whether that kind of insurrection has already occurred, either recently or not, is beside the point. It must not happen now with all eyes watching. Third, look for even more calls for even more internet censorship and a further ramp up of the security state. You can see this starting now in the pages of the New York Times, which, by the way, is so frickin' irresponsible these days, the Times. It's just, they should be ashamed of themselves. They've published 2 new articles titled "The Storming of Capitol Hill Was Organized on Social Media," quote unquote, and quote, "Violence on Capitol Hill is a day of reckoning for social media," unquote. Both arguing for more heavy-handed restrictions on speech from Silicon Valley tech giants. Now, I am for certain restrictions on speech, specifically for civility rules to govern speech on Twitter and Facebook and Google and on the other major platforms. I do not want, however, any rules or algorithms but governing content itself. At some other time, I can go over the civility rules that I favor, but the point being, I am for freedom of speech. I understand that freedom of speech has some limits. As Justice the most famous justice in Supreme Court history, has said that, and I blanked on his name. It will come to me. But what he said is, you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. That is an obvious case. And he went on to expound the clear and present danger doctrine in the Supreme Court, which is used to evaluate whether free speech was in order, or out of order. Now, one can argue that Trump's speech, in front of the White House, to a group of people, some of whom were evidently armed, was a situation where he exercised speech and there was a clear and present danger of that causing violence. That one may be hard to prove. There are some people who think that the people in front of the White House were peacefully assembled and that there was no clear and present danger of the specific words that Trump said, egging these people on to violence on Capitol Hill. Well, these are matters that can be adjudicated. They can be adjudicated in an impeachment hearing. That's all right. But there's at least a case to be made that using the clear and present danger standard, that Trump did violate that with his particular speech. But I don't know. I'm not concluding that, as yet. I have something, of an open mind, on that particular subject. As far as social media is concerned, there is often violent speech on social media. We've all seen it. I don't favor that continuing. I don't think it's good for the rational debate we need in a democracy. I, of course, occasionally curse myself, as you've noticed here. But you've also noticed, I'm sure, that I do not curse a blue streak. I don't mind cursing. And I don't automatically assume that someone who curses a blue streak is causing a problem, of disorder. So, I certainly tend to be on the side of very liberal free speech. I think speech should only be restricted in the most extreme of cases. But I do recognize that there must be limits to it. And the reason for that is that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. It's as simple, as that. Now, having said that, that's just a slogan. The hard work comes in figuring out where the boundaries are. And frankly, in this country, since the 1970s, the boundaries of free speech have been shrinking, not expanding. The boundaries of free speech and free press have been shrinking. And we have to expand them again because the limits of free expression are getting far too constrained. That's why Julian Assange is in trouble today. Generally speaking, we need more free speech, not less. We need more free speech on the social media platforms, not less. And that is what I favor at this point. Okay, quote, the violence Wednesday was the result of online movements operating in closed social media networks where people believe the claims of voter fraud of the election being stolen from Donald Trump, said the New York Times' Shira Frankel, quoted by Neuberger. Citing the expert analysis of think tank Spinmeister, Renee DeResta of, quote, Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset, quote unquote, fame. So we know who Renee DeResta is. She's not one of ours. As usual, no mention is made of DeResta's involvement in the new knowledge scandal in which a Russian interference, quote, false flag, unquote, was staged for an Alabama Senate race. The Times said that, evidently. Or let's see who said that. Yeah, this is a long quote, actually, from the Times. Quote, these people are acting because they are convinced an election was stolen. This is a demonstration of the very real-world impact of echo chambers, unquote. That was from DeResta. The first shot has already been fired. Bipartisan elites and most of D.C. consensus want a more locked-down society. It maintains the status quo from which they all feed, says Tom. So he's making that point. They want the status quo maintained. They represent the donor class. They feed from that. They want us locked down every bit as they want the right wing locked down. Every bit as much, maybe more so. They're usually more friendly to the right wing than they are to us. Though on this occasion, of course, their ox got gored by the right wing. And he asks, do you think the Democratic leaders want a George Floyd-like movement that colors outside the borders of what is benefiting them? That's never been true, says Tom. Joe Biden wants to increase police funding. The same is true of the Republican leaders, all but those who want to cynically benefit from insurrectionist feelings, like Josh Hawley. No one in permanent power wants a populace that meaningfully expresses dissatisfaction with the whole lot of them. Shutting down avenues of organization action will always be on the menu. The Capitol assault enables more of it. Finally, there's something like 74 million voters, and who knows how many non-voters who may think incorrectly that Biden is an illegitimate president-elect. This act, storming the Capitol building, flows from that thought. It's a wrong thought, yes. One fed by opportunism and propaganda, yes. But clearly those who think this way have withdrawn their, quote, consent to the governed, unquote, from the present U.S. government. This is a problem, but not the one you're likely thinking about. To get a sense of the problem I'm referring to, consider the following. Flip the situation around. Imagine that Trump had been narrowly elected instead, in the middle of numerous charges of fraud, in dear election by Republican election officials. Now imagine the courts upheld the result of that election despite obvious perversions to obtain the outcome. This is not beyond imagination. It happened in 2000. 4 more years of Trump would be a sentence to hell in the minds of many voters. They would not be wrong, given his bent of mind and radical incompetence. Now think of the dystopian role-play scenarios floated on the liberal left in the run-up to November. How many they were, how wide-ranging and panicked they were, and what they thought that might occur. If any of those fears were truly realized, then Trump was the winner. how many of us, whoever us may be, would feel like the 74 million fed by Trump? And if we did, what would we do about it? We may not riot in the Capitol building, but we might do other things like appeal to electors to violate their oath, to turn faithless. This is certainly what happened in 2016. And he then moves to quote a petition. We might do many things. Many would argue we should do many things. After all, in both our minds and fact, that Trump government would not be legitimate in the literal sense of the word. I fully understand that this Trump mob is entirely wrong-headed and that there's no comparison between Trump's electoral failure in 2020 when he lost popular vote and Clinton's in 2016 when she won it. I also understand that Trump, while not uniquely evil, is at least by temperament and by malignant psychology. But he is a genuine danger to any republic he rules. But set that aside. The way we would feel about a stolen Trump election is the way they feel about a stolen, quote unquote, Biden one. Would we act as those people did? I hope we would not, but we would act, using whatever levers of power we thought were fair, including perhaps unusual constitutional ones like challenges to electors and including perhaps numerous and energetic protests. Please be clear, I don't think we are like them, but also be clear. They feel as we would feel if what they fantasized happened to them had happened, in fact, to us. And that's the problem in a nutshell. If you want to feel this conundrum viscerally, watch this video, and he links to a video, which I'm not going to review here. He says, how do we deal with these people going forward? And what do we do when we are in their place as, so I think, we may certainly someday be. Now that, my friends, is worth thinking about. I thought it was worthwhile to bring that thought to you. So now let me get on to the business of the day, having spent far too much time on the news part of this. I want to then remind you for just a minute of the article I went over a couple of streams ago. The article called Democracy Will Never Be Delivered from Above, It Must Be Built from Below. That was done on Truthout by Tom Bauer. And it was an interview that he did with Camila Vergara. And Camila Vergara is the woman who was talking about needing to bring democracy and also needing to get around the oligarchy. And she characterized our system openly as an oligarchic democracy in that article. Okay, if you recall, she says, we're not a democracy, we are an oligarchic democracy. And she says that her way of getting us to a true democracy is to go to a system of local assemblies. Found them all over the country and create them as a network. They're assemblies in which people meet and make decisions. They're autonomous and can connect to other local assemblies, like town hall meetings. She conceived of this as a network of organic plants outside of the formal political system. but still a network that would have an effect on the formal political system, because it would make decisions and it would use those decisions to pressure people that had a formal position of power in local governments, in state governments, okay, and in the federal government. The, the organic structure of the local assemblies, in her concept, would kind of surround the formal political system and provide an environment for it. And it would be an environment in which the people would resist the oppression of the oligarchy. And she says the Constitution of Liberty is a constitution based on institutional conflict, on dissent and struggle. Just imagine if we had the power as citizens to veto laws that we believe are oppressive, or push for reform when elites are acting as gatekeepers of the status quo. And she talked about founding these assemblies, motions for repealing laws, these being voted, okay, and aggregated, and then the results being used to exert pressure on the formal elites. And she also said, when you vote within the formal system as an individual, you're part of the system. When you are together and you're able to deliberate and have arguments and testimony and experiences shared with people that you trust and people that you respect in your neighborhood that you already know or that you start to know, then something new can happen. Thinking with others, common sense arises. A common sense not constrained by the individualist system. So I think this idea, which she relates to Athens, okay, an Athenian style democracy, this reminds me of some ideas I've been working with for a long time for a system that would be able to control the oligarchy and really diminish and get rid of the oligarchy by encouraging continuous bottom-up organization. In that article, at one point, there was a question, can you Zoom assemblies? The answer was yes, you can have a Zoom assembly. And actually, Zoom can accommodate more than 100 people, so you can have an assembly. The mayor would need to yield power. And the interviewer asked, yield power? She said, this is the point, it's difficult. The mayors don't like to be told what to do, but you're not going to waste your time going to a Zoom assembly if you know your vote doesn't mean anything. Why are you going to waste your time if you have no power? In order to have assemblies work, they need to have power. It would be necessary for a mayor to say, okay, let's organize these neighborhood assemblies, and whatever is decided in the assemblies, I will do within my scope, okay, of power. So the vision here is that the formal leaders would look to the assemblies because they would have no choice. If they didn't look to the assemblies, then it was possible that the people functioning in the assemblies to pressure them would vote, okay, in elections and vote them out. and would also provide some wiggle room to deal with the oligarchs. But the suggestion of Zoom assemblies then brings us to what I now want to talk about. And that is I will now begin to share the screen. So I have this idea of establishing a meta layer of political and social interaction that would provide an environment for people to self-organize in bottom-up fashion continuously every day of the year. And it seems to me such a meta layer, by creating dynamism in the system, always challenging elites, always providing fresh leaders to challenge the previous elites or the static elites. You could have continual replacement, of elites within society from the bottom up, which would cause the system to be much more dynamic and prevent oligarchies from ossifying over time, becoming static, and basically creating some form of oligarchy that eventually turned into, an aristocracy. So then the question becomes, if you're going to build a meta layer like this, can you do it with the assistance of information technology? The idea of the Zoom assemblies, was mentioned. But even though Zoom is quite a sophisticated piece of software, in many ways, it's not sophisticated enough to support the meta layer requirements for restoring democracy, and open society. And maybe restoring is the wrong word, because maybe that word should be for creating democracy and open society for the first time, because the argument can certainly be made that we have never really had a democracy and an open society here in the United States. So it may not be a question of restoring something that has never existed, but creating something, that had never existed. So what are the meta layer requirements for restoring democracy and open society? So let me go through these now. First, I want to mention the complex adaptive systems. Complex adaptive systems are found in nature. Essentially, life involves always a complex adaptive system. Human lives, humans, are like that too. Groups of humans are like that. Cities are complex adaptive systems. States, organizations are complex adaptive systems. I'm not going to define what complex adaptive systems are here yet, because giving a simple definition, okay, is not illuminating, and it would take me a long time that I don't have this evening to go through 9 different characteristics, okay, of complex adaptive systems that I prefer to talk about to give people a clear idea of what a complex adaptive system or a CAS is. But I'll start to talk about CASs as if you know the definition. And by the end of that time, you'll begin to get a better idea of what I mean by a complex adaptive system. So I just want to point out that human complex adaptive systems are different from those, okay, of other animals. And the reason why is they're subject to human attempts to change the patterns of interaction in society, okay, or in other systems that humans create, to change the patterns of interaction and outcomes that their CASs are predisposed, okay, to produce. In fact, politics and management and leadership is frequently about attempting to treat organizations as though they were or ought to behave like systems that are mechanical, cars, planes, things that we build, essentially the printer on my desk, the cups that we make. Those are mechanical systems subject to determinate cause and effect relations, rather than there being complex adaptive systems whose adaptive global behavior. What's the global behavior, okay, of a complex adaptive system? Well, one aspect of the global behavior, okay, of a nation is going to war, for example. That's an aspect, okay, the global behavior, okay, of a nation. Okay, another aspect of the global behavior, okay, of a nation is whether that nation is an oligarchy or not. If it has the properties, okay, of an oligarchy, that's a property of the whole. It may not be a property, okay, of any of the parts, or it may be a property of some of the parts, but not all of the parts. This refers to global properties of a whole system. So here I have in mind adaptive global behavior that results from self-organization within the system, self-organization of the components of the system. Okay, in the case of a nation state, self-organization among the people of that nation, and distributed knowledge processing to solve problems in that particular system. In other words, if a nation has problems, it's not just people in the government who are trying to contribute to the solution of the problems. We may all be trying to contribute to solving the problems in our various ways. In some ways, our participation in Facebook or Twitter, or, writing letters to the editor or letters to our congressman or things like that, that's part of distributed knowledge processing in the system. So, please allow me to go further. Okay, I hope you're interested in this. It is a little more abstract than I normally am, but I hope you'll like this line of reasoning and where I go with it. So I pointed out already that human complex adaptive systems, are Promethean. Promethean from the Greek, well, he was a titan. So let's say that he was a god, okay, in the mythology. Okay, Greece, okay, Prometheus, so godlike intervention. But human cases are subject to human attempts to change the patterns of interaction and outcomes that their cases are predisposed, okay, to produce. Oh, did I just go over that? I thought I just went over that. Sorry, folks. I duplicated that. Forgive me. Let me share the screen again then. So these cases, okay, the Promethean cases, or PCASes, as I call them, have certain characteristics. Such attempts to control a PCAS actually produce continual conflict between the predispositions produced by the interacting people, the agents, within self-organizing processes, and other predispositions, tendencies, okay, produced by efforts of the powerful and the influential to realize their own visions of the future through command and control kinds, okay, of interventions. So I conclude human cases are PCASes because their normal predispositions towards behavior and distributed knowledge processing are subject to the godlike, quote unquote, intervention of powerful and influential agents just of the individuals in the system, in the lingo of complex adaptive systems theory. So this is why the iron law of oligarchy, originally stated, okay, by Michels, if I recall, it was in 1914, in his political party's book, is often predictive of politics in political parties and democracies. And what the iron law is about is the idea that any human system, when constituted by people, begins to ossify. It may start out very democratically, with an ideology that's very democratic, and with people in political parties intending to support a democracy. But as time goes on, because of the efforts of the leaders of the party who have power to stay in power, you get a movement toward oligarchy and human-based systems that happens because powerful people and institutions don't like continuous self-organization. Why not? Because the appearance of new ideas, ideologies, and power structures provides a challenge to them. Was Nancy Pelosi thrilled when AOC and Ilhan Omar and Presley and Rashida, when they appeared in Congress with new ideas and a different ideology that Nancy Pelosi hadn't had to cope with up until that time? And they started to form into a power structure? Nancy Pelosi didn't like that. Richie Neal didn't like that. Jim Clyburn did not like that. So what did they do? They intervened to stop or regulate it. And in doing so, they were trying to destroy the essence of democracy, the ability of people to always organize anew and disturb and even displace the policies, power structures, elites, and institutions of the past with new ones that are more adaptive in solving the problems of the present and the future. What is the squad trying to do? It is trying to confront the problems that we face now and to contribute to solving those problems in a more aggressive way than the problems have been confronted in the past, with newer ideas about how to cope with those particular problems. One impact of the squad on the CPC already is that the CPC has been changing its structure so that it can become more powerful in the Congress and gets more of its ideas accepted. So the policies, the power structures, the old elites, and the institutions of the past, like the pay-go rule, can be modified, can be gotten rid of. Change coming from the bottom of the Congress, coming from relatively poor districts within the country, change coming from the bottom up and embodied in these young representatives. I know they failed us on January 3rd. They did. I was right in the forefront of declaring their failure. So I certainly recognize it. I certainly know about that. But nevertheless, I think overall, the characterization I've just given is correct. So let's go further. One of the problems with the Promethean casts and with PCASs in general is that they are unstable. Why are they unstable? Because the task of any caste system is to maintain itself at the edge of chaos. There, in caste systems, in living systems, there is a narrow range of stability of those systems. And the system has to continuously adapt to maintain itself at what's called the edge of chaos. It cannot fall into chaos. It also cannot fall to the other side, which is the side of being a rigidified, stratified system, more like a complicated system, more like a mechanical determinate system than like a living system. Now, this business of maintaining itself at the edge of chaos is difficult enough in the face of environmental influences that tend to transition Promethean castes either to chaotic dynamics or to closed systems inexorably driven toward a sterile mechanical equilibrium. It is even more difficult in the context of continuing political or management interventions that frequently may amplify the strength of tendencies toward one extreme or another by changing the internal environment affecting self-organization and management. leadership and politics. Now, open societies must have self-organization in distributed knowledge processing and problem solving. I'll go into more detail about that. In the context of open enterprises and open societies, the task is about implementing policies and programs that will support self-organization and distributed knowledge processing and problem solving by maintaining openness in recognizing problems, developing alternative solutions to those problems, and eliminating errors. What do I mean by eliminating errors? Well, when we come up with alternative solutions and we consider them, we make a choice about what solutions we're going to pursue to problems. We compare the different alternatives and try to eliminate, our errors and try to come up with the correct alternative. That's one process, of eliminating errors. Then we have the brute kind of animal process, of eliminating errors. And that process is we try out the alternative solution and we find it doesn't work. And then we eliminate the error in the hard way by going to one of the other solutions. But there lies a problem. Often we're not open-minded enough to confront our errors and admit, our errors. And so eliminate our errors. Instead, we start making the same errors over and over and over and over and over again. And if you think this is uncommon in politics, I'll just ask you to look at Russiagate. Certainly, seizing on Russiagate was a false solution to the problem of losing the election of 2016 to Donald Trump. It would have been far better to have tried to learn from the experience and developed alternative solutions for trying to beat Trump, instead of trying to go back and back and back again to the idea of blaming the failure on Russiagate and considering that resistance against Trump. Now, finally, the Democratic Party did succeed, but it did not cover itself with glory all through the Trump administration. It barely won. Its resistance to Trump was gloriously ineffective because it never embraced the reality of error. If open enterprises and open societies are to continue to exist, there have to be processes which enable people, encourage people to ruthlessly recognize and eliminate their errors. When they make an error, they have to recognize it as a problem, that they failed to solve the original problem. And they have to circle back to look at more alternative solutions for that problem. They have to be ruthless in recognizing the truth. Now we can see in our society we're terrible about that. Look at Trump's people. Look at Trump's people. They elected Trump as the solution to a problem, to stop themselves from getting screwed anymore. Is that what happened under Trump? They still believe, evidently, that it has happened. They haven't embraced the idea that in terms of their material problems, Trump has done very, very little for them. They're in a terrible situation. They're not saying, hey, this is because of Trump and his terrible performance in relation to COVID. I mean, they're blaming it on Antifa, some of those people. Blaming it on Antifa. They're blaming it on Joe Biden. But I don't mean to point to them, okay, as silly. I already gave you the example of the Democrats coming out of the 2016 election. Anyway, apart from the elimination of error, we need to have openness in communicating and diffusing new solutions across either the enterprise, the organization, the political party, or across society. Conversely, leadership, including management and politics, in such systems that undermine self-organization by repressing or otherwise manipulating it, will transition human Promethean castes away from openness and democracy towards extreme conflict systems or authoritarian or totalitarian types of oligarchies. Now, I submit to you people, that is what has been happening in America over the last 40 years. What has the oligarchy been doing? At every turn, it tries to undermine our self-organization. Look what they've done to third parties by passing laws restricting the operations of third parties so third parties can never challenge them. This transitioned us away from openness, from democracy, from adaptiveness, towards extreme conflict systems. Look at the polarization of the political system. Look at the movement of our society towards an authoritarian type of oligarchy, or perhaps a totalitarian type, of oligarchy. We're still tending that way. Why? Because our leadership, our elites, have been undermining bottom-up self-organization all this time, for the last 40 years in various ways. That is what they have been about, as much as they've been about stripping us of our material wealth, looting, wholesale, legal looting. So, the question hanging in the balance is, for democratic societies today, an important question hangs in the balance. How can we counter tendencies toward oligarchy in our democracies by restoring self-organization and distributed knowledge processing to their proper place in reinforcing open society, democracy, and adaptiveness to environmental and societal change? Many are looking to e-participation innovations in democracy to provide an answer. Like the article where Camila Vergara said, Zoom meetings, we can have Zoom assemblies. That's e-participation. But if e-participation is to serve the purpose of enhancing democracy, rather than the purpose of elite astroturfing, manufacturing consent within a totalitarian type oligarchy, that e-participation platforms must fulfill certain requirements. What are those requirements? That is the question. To stop the movement towards oligarchy, we have to create a new institutional framework that allows us to change those aspects of our present situation supporting oligarchy and undermining open society. We need a framework that will operate within the context of existing rules and laws to create changes supporting increased self-organization and distributed knowledge processing, shifting our democratic PCASs back towards an open state. So now, if you will give me a moment, I will. I only wanted a certain number of slides open, okay, at once. So now I need just a moment to locate the rest of them. Here I go. Okay. I am ready now. So, we need a new institutional framework. It has to provide a meta layer of political interaction and networking that places new ecological constraints on the current political system, driving it back towards a condition in which the ability of individuals to both arrive at more accurate constructions of reality and act on them through increased self-organization and distributed knowledge processing is dominant. So let me now. Yes. So let's see what that actually means right now. They say one picture is worth 1,000 words. Let us see if that is true. So this is a graphic. At the bottom, this is called democracy with a platform enabled, like what I call, a meta layer. Okay, what is a meta layer? It's a control layer for the system. This meta layer is comprised of self-organizing voting blocks, political parties, electoral coalitions, distributed problem-solving, learning, new knowledge, and also negotiation. And how is the meta layer created? It's created through people using a particular information technology platform, a web-based platform, okay, that has not been created yet. That software application has not been actually created. I have the design for it. Here, what I'm talking about is the requirements for it. But just as a summary, you can see that the idea is that this network has to empower voters to create a bottom-up democracy. This happens through voters' self-organizing processes using the web platform to build voting blocks, also political parties, electoral coalitions of parties and voting blocks, and an alternative world of information, knowledge, and political cultural norms from the bottom up, all insulated from the media, the mainstream media. This might be an environment within which alternative media could survive and thrive. The mass media, however, would be barred from this platform, except, of course, if it's introduced by people participating in the platform, if those sources of information are introduced in that particular way. But the mass media organizations themselves would not have access to this particular platform. Why is that? Because if you look to the right of the graphic, we have what we have now there. We have the pre-existing elites controlling the media institutions, influencing the interest groups and the political parties, and buying off the office holders and the candidates, and the conflict within the system. The individual voters and pre-existing social networks try to influence the parties, try to influence the office holders, try to influence the interest groups, try to influence the media institutions. But the influence of the pre-existing elites is decisive. The downward influence is winning right now. That's why we have an oligarchy. The upward influences are not being successful. But if the voters and citizens more generally can interact in the political network, empowering the voters to create a bottom-up democracy, if we can self-organize in that alternative world, in that web environment, and create these new voting blocks, political parties, and electoral coalitions, and this new world of information, knowledge, and cultural norms, created out of what we do, completely apart from the institutions influenced by the elites, specifically the donor elites. We can create a meta layer of interaction that can influence the individual voters and the pre-existing social networks and change them, and then increase the influence they have on the office holders and candidates, the parties and interest groups, the media institutions, and the pre-existing elites. So, but how do we get there? That's the question. We now can visualize a little better where it is we need to go. First of all, we have to note that a web-based platform enables the emergence of the meta layer. Because we're not going to get the meta layer by ourselves. I don't think it'll be very effective. I don't think the local assemblies of Camilo Vergara are going to be efficient enough to create the voting blocks, the political parties, and the electoral coalitions we need to shake the elite system. But with the web-based platform we're talking about here, I think the meta layer can emerge from and be enabled by this platform, and that it can eventually incorporate most of the eligible voters in a political system. What I envision would be a much more potent type of application than Facebook is today, with many, many more capabilities. And of course, with a rigorous political neutrality designed to support open society and democracy, which of course does not exist in Facebook. The platform provides capabilities for self-organized political organizations that can overcome the impact of big money and media on political parties, on legislators, on legislatures, and politics, generally speaking. Hang on just a second. The framework has to provide or enable social contexts and milieus. Okay, what's a milieu? It's just a place, social context, okay, in a place, okay, an environment, within which people can organize themselves and others around public policy agendas comprised of policy options and policy priorities. Think about Bernie Sanders' agenda that he placed on his website, all the detail, the whole agenda. It was comprised of policy options. Now, he never prioritized all of those particular policies, but people would be able to use that framework to define their own policy agenda that would have their own policy options, and that would have a means for them to prioritize those options. Using the platform, people would be able to organize themselves into voting blocks and electoral coalitions ranging from very small to blocks of millions of voters without needing sizable financial resources from sources external to these social milieus. Why not? How would this happen? Because the social milieus would be mostly defined in the context of the platform, of the web-based platform. Now, people could and would meet in person as well, and that would be enabled by the platform too. But first, they would meet on the platform in web conferencing kinds of contexts in order to get to know each other, okay, in order to come together. Now, people might also meet outside of the web platform where they're in a local physical environment, but to combine in support of certain policies. They wouldn't be able to go to one central place. The application would be the central place. But the key thing is that in the context of the application, they would not be subject to external mass media communications influenced by the financial oligarchs and other special interests. They will be free to create their own communications networks and their own narratives created in their own voting blocks and their own coalitions. That's what could happen over a period, okay, of time. So the framework also has to either provide, okay, or enable further social contexts and milieus, has to offer the possibility of informal group and social network formation around these policy agendas. And these have to be transparent and inclusive in providing participants with previously developed data, information, and knowledge, and allowing them freedom to participate in communicating, organizing, collaborating, critically evaluating, problem solving, and decision making within voting blocks and electoral coalitions, in which participants have a modicum of trust, okay, in other participants. Why would this have to happen? Because groups in which participants did not have a modicum of trust, okay, in other groups, would not be as capable of surviving and growing in this environment. The people in them would be fighting, and the people in them would be constantly destroying the groups they joined and would then have to join in some other groups. For groups, okay, for voting blocks to survive in this particular context, participants would have to develop a modicum of trust in other participants over a longer period of time, not just days, but weeks or months or even years. The only way these groups could survive is if the individuals in them had a modicum of trust, okay, in one another. Also, the framework has to provide, okay, or enable participants and voting blocks to communicate their policy agendas to candidates for public office, okay, and to office holders. So it's not enough just to develop the policy agendas. and to agree on the policy agendas, and for the voting blocks then to aggregate from the bottom up the policy agendas. But they have to be able to communicate their policy agendas to candidates for public office and office holders. And they have to be able to secure either commitments to these agendas from the office holders or the candidates, or they have to be able to get clear refusals to support them. But of course, they can do that if they have the communication capabilities and if they harass the public office, okay, and office holders. Why should the office holders communicate with them and seek their support? Well, that's going to depend on the size of the voting block. As the voting block grows to a particular size and represents, say, 1,000 people, most candidates for Congress are going to pay attention to that if you represent 1,000 people. If you represent 10,000 people, you're a lobby group that could be very important to them. Remember, people in your lobby group may be giving contributions, may provide volunteer support to candidates. You'll be in a position, if you persist, you'll be in a position to get clear commitments or clear refusals. Participants and voting blocks, the system has to enable participants in voting blocks to continuously monitor and rate performance of office holders against agendas and to decide whether to continue to support them after performance ratings are arrived at. So the capability to continuously monitor and rate the performance of office holders against the agendas on a day-to-day basis, the software will allow people to monitor and to change these ratings whenever the individuals want to change their ratings. And the software would aggregate these ratings to produce aggregated ratings of the office holders by the voting block. This would be on the website. So candidates and office holders could see on a daily basis how they're being rated by the voting block. That is, the voting block could get mind share of somebody in the office of a congressperson every day. The people in the congressional offices could track the performance ratings. Every day it would become a routine thing. And to watch how what the representatives do affects their ratings every day. The system would have to enable tools for voting blocks and electoral coalitions to organize efforts to get both major party and third-party candidates and initiatives onto ballots, and to get people to the polls to vote. So you could organize efforts to go to the polls and to votes through the web platform. And you'd kind of be expected to do that. That would be one of the primary functions of the platform, to facilitate this kind of organization. Put simply, the platform has to enable the voting blocks through its tools to do all the things political parties now do to support candidates they want to elect, and to introduce the ballot initiatives that they want to pass. So, the new institutional framework must provide an alternative network of social and political relations to the contemporary world of the political parties and established interest groups. The alternative world must embody the key attributes of open society, which means it must provide an informal communications and knowledge network through the platform that is very much independent of the mass media and also capable of enabling creating highly cohesive voting blocks and electoral coalitions of many millions of people. So envision it. On a daily basis, people are contributing to redefining policy agendas and policy priorities and new policy options. And with all these people contributing, joining in a collaborative effort, the voting blocks that survive competition, because in this system, people could vote with their feet all the time. They're always free to leave one voting block and join another. So there's going to be constant shifting around because we have elites in this world too. But in this world, when the elites piss off people at the bottom of their voting blocks, they'll be able to vote with their feet in the system and join other voting blocks. So the voting blocks, the parties and the electoral coalitions that survive and that grow will have to be ones that satisfy their base. They'll have to be ones that are highly responsive to their base. Because even unlike in the real world, or the world that exists now, I should say, in this alternative world, people would be much more easily able to abandon one political party and go to another, or one electoral coalition go to another, or one voting block and go to another. There would be a great deal of circulation at the bottom, and a great deal of opportunity for new people to rise up within these voting blocks. And there would even be new political parties which can offer decisive support to candidates and office holders in return for their continuing support of the agendas of the voting blocks. So we're now approaching the end, of course. So what do we have? We have an alternative network of social and political relations. We have an alternative world which will then work as a meta layer, constraining the prior political world and preventing it from concentrating power in oligarchies by subjecting the oligarchies to continuous self-organization and a cultural background of new knowledge arising from distributed knowledge processing. Now, in this discussion, I've deliberately avoided talking about the design of such a platform. Okay, I've written about the design of such a platform. Okay, it's on my website. Okay, it's part of the article that I've linked to. But that gets more technical, and I didn't think you'd be as interested in the more technical stuff than in the less technical stuff, specifically the requirements analysis. Okay, I want to end, and I see most of you are still here, so I couldn't have done too badly. I want to end by reminding you of the overarching view of the individual voters and the pre-existing social networks in the real world on the bottom. On the right, the pre-existing elites, the media institutions, the interest groups, the parties, office holders and candidates. That's the world we have now. And then the political network empowering voters to create a bottom-up democracy through voters' self-organizing processes using the web platform to build voting blocks, political parties, electoral coalitions, and an alternative world of information, knowledge, and political cultural norms from the bottom up, all insulated from the mass media, which, of course, as we know, is corrupt and penetrated by the elites. That's why we have to isolate this and create a new world. And that would produce the meta layer. I show the meta layer as separate from the platform. And the reason for that is that it's not the same as the platform. The platform allows the meta layer to emerge, but the meta layer is a layer of self-organizing voting blocks, political parties, electoral coalitions, and of course, it's a meta layer of mind. It's a meta layer comprised of individual minds and collective minds. It's not just in the hardware. It's in the life. It's a form of life, itself. That layer of life can regulate the undemocratic system we have now and can shift its nature so that instead of being an oligarchic democracy, as it is now, it can become a real democracy, which is powered by the bottom-up forces of the people. How does it relate to the local assemblies that Vergara talked about? Well, of course, the local assemblies can be institutions within the political network. We have the voting blocks, we have the political parties, we have the electoral coalitions. We can have the local assemblies too be part of that particular system. And the network of local assemblies that we need for Vergara's system could be instantiated in this particular meta layer system as well. Because the meta layer that is created could include the local assembly network. That's why her treatment reminded me, of this. And that's what has motivated this particular treatment. Now, why did I bother talking about this tonight? Why do I think it's so important? Well, that's because of what I went over the last couple of live streams. Over the last 40 years, we've become an oligarchic democracy that's not caring for the people. We have to end the oligarchy. This is a software application. It's going to take considerable capital to get this off the ground. Though not huge expenditures. Somebody like Bernie Sanders, had he been so inclined, as part of his own campaign, could have raised enough money to run his campaign as he did. And he had enough time and had enough money to do the development of this kind of application so that by the time of the primaries, He might have had this voting block application to serve him. Yes, it would have cost quite a bit probably to develop. I mean, in the end, what happens is, the initial version might cost 5 to 10 million, but then as you expand it, you get more servers, you get more people on it, everything else, soon you're up in the 50 million range to 100 million range or stuff like that. But of course, if it's getting you people in the voting blocks, if it's getting you people ready to work in the campaigns, in the external world, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. And of course, this creates an arena of political conflict, another way of influencing the office holders. I put to you, it's much better to have political conflict in this world than it is to have the kind of political conflict we saw on January 6th. And by the way this application is set up, because of the critical way the dialogue would be set up in this application, and the controls that there would be on expression in order to foster rational dialogue in the context of the application, that the implementation of that would be such that people would have to dialogue together in a reasonable way in order to develop the modicum of trust that is necessary for these social networks to grow. And the demagogues like Trump would have no place in a system like this. They could not function within it because they would be tripped up by the day-to-day dialogue with people exchanging facts. If they tried the kind of BS that Trump excelled in, that type of person could never build a voting bloc within this platform. Couldn't happen. They can only develop their own voting blocks through the conventional mass media. So they would be left to that platform, and they would be at a disadvantage in problem solving with respect to growth of the voting blocks and the new political parties. So in a contest over any period of time, structures like that would lose. They would lose to the adaptive, the voting blocks and electoral coalitions and political parties that the platform would enable people to create. So I want to leave you with that thought, and I'm going to consider your comments now. I hope you found this stimulating. It wasn't like my usual thing, but it seemed to me that I had to start talking about some solutions for this that I think are going to work, because the usual solutions we've all been trying and contributing our money to and contributing our effort to have not been working. The oligarchy has been able to counter them in various ways thus far, as we all recognize. And I'm afraid that if we continue on the same path with only the solutions we've been pursuing thus far, including the Bernie type of solution, that the oligarchy will always be able to pull tricks on us. Anyway, here's Kevin St. Fort, and he says, hey, Lana, Barbara Wernick said he's going down. Every politician with an ounce of integrity will disassociate. He is going down, but a lot of politicians don't have an ounce of integrity. They are intrinsically totalitarians. So we'll have to see, Barbara. Hope you're right, though. Terry Cook says when you're in a march, the organizers must have a security team set up of veterans to stop the ones feeling compelled to or paid to bust stuff up will be stopped. Also, when violence commences, leave the Top Cat plan. Thank you, Terry, for the link. When Rebecca McClaskey says, if they use the 25th Amendment, we cannot charge him with any crimes due to mental capacity. Impeachment means Pence can turn around and pardon him. He can pardon him for federal crimes, but he cannot pardon him for state, and local crimes. And he's got many, many crimes. And Pence may not pardon him. Pence may not pardon him. After what he pulled, endangering Pence's life, if I were Pence, I wouldn't pardon him. I'd leave him to twist slowly, slowly in the wind, as we used to say. Anyway, I think boxing him out until the transfer of power is best for the nation, which is already happening. I don't think so. I think what's best is ending the moral hazard. Presidents have been creating moral hazards around them. Everybody reasons. We got to wait until they out, and then we got to heal. No. We heal by delivering justice. That's how we heal. Anyway, following Rebecca's comment still, I think boxing him out until the transfer of power is best for the nation, which is already happening. The generals are not going to follow orders that are unconstitutional, and Congress could stop any fear by removing executive power to start armed conflicts. This should be done anyway. Yeah, it would be wonderful if Congress tomorrow could pass a bill withdrawing the authorization to use military force. But Congress doesn't want to do that. They want to keep that authorization in place. It would be wonderful if Congress could repeal the Patriot Act tomorrow as well, a further source of abuse, of executive power. Those would be great. It would be great if Congress tomorrow could get rid of the Department of Homeland Security. That would be wonderful too. But, I don't think that's going to happen. The most likely thing that can happen in a very short period is impeach him, and for the Senate to convict him, and for him to no longer be the president 3 days from now. That's the quickest thing that can happen. I think we should shoot for the quickest thing. If the Republicans block the quickest thing, let them bear the political responsibility for that. Let them bear the responsibility for whatever Trump does from here on in. Sandy Degg says, hello, everyone, shared. And Dolores Pierce says, thank you, Sandy, for sharing. And Dolores Pierce says, the Capitol was left unsecured, well knowing protesters were going to be there. That alone tells me the event was staged. I don't know if it begs the question of who staged it. I don't think it was staged by the Congress. I don't think it was staged by the Capitol Police. They knew protesters were going to be there. Right. But I don't know who staged this. If it was staged by anybody, it seems to me it was Proud Boy forces or Trump forces that staged this. Okay, so Laura says, now there's a push for a domestic terrorist bill. In the end, we know the term domestic terrorist will be used against leftists and people of color. I agree with that. Domestic terrorist label takes away your constitutional rights. I agree with you there completely. But I don't think this was staged by the deep state or the authorities, or anybody like that. But still, we've got to stop them from capitalizing on it. Terry Cook says, Trump must have the goods on Pence is the only reason I can see why he doesn't enact the 25th right now. He might not enact the 25th right now because he might not have the votes in the cabinet. Cabinet officers have been resigning because they don't want to make a decision. The acting people who take over are Trump people. They're Trump people. Maybe Pence can't get a majority of the cabinet right now. That's perfectly possible. Maybe Trump doesn't want to have the responsibility of invoking the 25th. Then the blame would fall on him. Evidently, people wanted to execute him a few days ago already without his directly displacing Trump. Maybe he just wants to put the responsibility on the Congress, on Nancy Pelosi and Mitch. Terry Cook says, there isn't enough time to get Trump out. To get Trump out immediately, but by Pence doing that, strips Trump of powers, the Top Cat plan, the CCRG info. Well, based on what I'm reading, I think impeachment will be quicker. Okay, because first you have to invoke the 25th. You have to get a majority of the cabinet to be willing to invoke it, to agree with you. Then you invoke it. Then Trump is displaced. But he immediately writes a letter to Congress, nonsense, I'm fine. And he's back in. At that point, what has to happen is that Pence has to go to Congress again and get Congress to vote on whether he's okay or not. That takes a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. Impeachment only takes a majority vote of the House and a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And the House gets to make the case in front of the Senate to get the 2/3 vote. In the case of the 25th, the House doesn't get to make any case in front of the Senate. It's just a 2/3 vote of both houses. Might be more difficult to get a 2/3 vote of both houses. I think the Republicans have enough House seats right now that they can block a 2/3 vote in the House. I think the chances of getting a 2/3 vote in the Senate are greater than the chances of getting a 2/3 vote in both bodies. So I don't think the 25th is the right way to go. I'm not sure what you're reading. I'll take a look at that link. But I don't think that's the best way to go. I think the quickest way to go is impeachment. If they do it right, it can be done by Wednesday. Impeachment and conviction. Kay says, hi, Sandy Day. Barbara says, listen, someone on the federal level denied access to National Guard support. That's the smoking gun, in my humble opinion. Yeah, I think it was Trump who denied access to National Guard support. Well, that's the story anyway. That someone at the Defense Department level denied access to National Guard support. And the story I've heard that it was under orders from Trump. Carmen says, feels like apocalyptic 2020 has only continued. And it's December 10th, 2020. Terry Cook says, coverage of our nation's riot that injured 50 police officers and one dead from his injuries for what? Because the emperor needed that for his ego and later turned on the ones he gave on the ones he gave his the 1 hour motivation rant posted on January 9th, 2021 by Terry during a 2-hour production. The Chaos Crew Street Justice, I asked the question, quote, hey, crew, what is the penalty for murdering a police officer in line of duty with a fire extinguisher, unquote. At the end of the question, there came the only 3 seconds. See how much fun they have in the slammer. If they are gay, they will have more fun, says Terry Cook. I don't know if they will. I mean, I don't know if gay men, I mean, we're talking rape here. I don't think that's enjoyable whether you're gay or straight. Carmen says, feels like it's December 10th, 2021. Continuation. Carmen says, oh, there's going to be some soap picking up going to be found on. Carmen says, going on correction. Terry Cook says, probably a couple of times a day. Carmen says, ouch. Rebecca says, apparently they're planning a million militia march on the day of the inauguration. But these militia are illegal. We're starting a petition here in Oregon where Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer have been a constant presence at our capital, including storming the legislature in a special session to have them arrested and charged with public endangerment. It's a mirror of what we witnessed in Washington, D.C. on the 6th. Great, great. I think if the militia march on Washington, for the inauguration, then they're going to be met with federal troops. They're not going to get a chance to interfere, with the inauguration. Kay says, where's Evelina upon tonight? Sandy Deck says Trump equals something or other. And Rebecca says Tim Canosa also spoke at that rally. At which rally? Carmen says, good news. I think we're getting debit cards with the 600 this time. Oh, you think so? Carmen says it was implied. Kay says, I already got my direct deposit, Carmen. Oh, good. Tonight I will look for mine, Kay. Who knows? Maybe it's arrived in our account. I hope so. Steve says, they had a tent erected before the Capitol attack, complete with TV screens. They knew it was going to happen, and they had their own situation room to watch it from. Don the Con Jr. and Ivanka. Oh, you mean the Trumpists knew, and they had their own situation room. Yeah, I believe that. I believe this was a Trump attack on the Congress. That's what it was. There was an attack by the executive branch on the Congress. That's called the coup d'etat. And Barbara Wernick says, absolutely must be addressed now. And Dolores says, Tim Canova was there to speak about his primary experience and the need for election integrity. Where was Tim? I'm sorry, at what rally? Kay says, I saw that video, Steve. Terry says, I'm talking about next Friday's Pirate Radio, USA Net, boldbravemedia.com, 7 to 9 Eastern, 866-451-1451, about the most hated man these days. Mitch McConnell was discharged 36 days of 36 nights after the lights went out. Old Mitch with his hot ass going from bed to bed until he ran across a guy, didn't like his face, turned him in. Mitch got a summary court-martial, convicted for actions not becoming an Army soldier, from actions against the Code of Military Conduct after he... God, Terry, what is that? Carmen Muniz says, hashtag Death Santis is already planning to use the January 6th riot, or whatever is the right term, to outlaw protesting in Florida. Can't do that, the Constitution. Kay says, no surprise there, Carmen. Shake my head. But what are they going to do? Shoot somebody? Carmen says, they'll try. That would be unconstitutional and will certainly lose in a court case. I would say they're showboating. Me too. And Laura says the Capitol was left unsecured, well knowing the protest was coming and the possibility of unhinged folks could be coming. Yes, I agree, Dolores. And the peaceful ones left when the violence began, which was wise. If you are in prison in a riot, when the murdering commences, you go to your cell. Yeah, the peaceful ones in the Capitol did leave when the riot commenced, or a lot of them left. But also, some of them who were involved in the riot were escorted out by the Capitol Police. That is well known by now. Carmen says intellectuals cuss. Kay says, I learned years ago when I was a protester in the late 60s, you stay as far away from the cops as you can. Terry says, Claire Edwards has a video on the Justice News Network, a must-see, and gives a link. Anthony smiles, and Carmen says, Cheeto Tweedo tried to use his POTUS Twitter account after getting banned, and Twitter shut that down too. That's narcissistic Narcissistic injury. Hopefully he'll commit suicide. Kay says, back in the 60s, we tried to stay away from news cameras too. These idiots took their own pics and posted them online. Laugh out loud. How dumb is that? Dumber than we were. Terry says, an increase of 0.5% in our death rate for the year does not warrant the closing of the economy for the little businesses, leading a clear path for the big boys at heyday. Those claimed to have died from the virus were the 500,000 Americans dead from hospital malpractice, or those suffering for... I'm sorry, Terry, that's a fable. I just don't believe that. I'm watching the statistics that are being reported by the hospitals, okay, as cataloged at the Worldometer site, and what we're talking about is differences between deaths between last year, okay, and this year. Now, I don't think hospital malpractice has much change between this year, okay, and last year. The excess of deaths, which is up around the 500,000 range, okay, right now, which is not equivalent to the official statistics on deaths, which are about 375,000 at last look. Is it 375,000 now? Hang on a second, let me see. I may be exaggerating it, I don't like to do that. Let me double check. 381,367 as of today, according to the Worldometer site. That is probably equivalent to about a 500,000 difference between this year, okay, and last year in fatalities. Okay, so that 500,000 difference is not due to malpractice. That's not difference in malpractice. The only thing that could have caused such a difference is COVID. The real deaths from COVID probably have reached nearly 500,000 by now. Don't try to distort that. And as for the closing of the economy, that could have been done for an extremely limited time if they had closed it lock, stock, and barrel like they did in New Zealand and like they did in Taiwan. They could have gotten this under control, okay, in a matter of weeks. Do you know, Terry, that the death rate in Taiwan, fatalities per million, is 0.3 of one person per million in a country of 24 million people? And 5 fatalities per million in New Zealand? If we had managed as well as Hong Kong, Terry, we would have had 100 deaths right now instead of 381,000. So don't talk to me about not warranting the closing of the economy for the little businesses. This had been done right. Those little businesses could have been closed for only a month, and it would have been over if then tracing and testing and quarantining were religiously followed by the bozos who were running our government. Carmen says, it happened to us with Bernie twice. Terry says, in the name of carbon reductions, will bring the rulers to outlaws all cars running an internal combustion engine, put a carbon tax that will make a huge impact on the farmers since livestock manure cause large amounts of greenhouse gases. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think outlawing all cars running an internal combustion engine will happen after a period of time. That's quite likely to happen. And good riddance, too. Good riddance, Terry. Barbara Wernick says, the big question. Terry Cook says, most Americans run DGAs, distributed generation. We make our own homemade green hydrogen, have our own clean water, organic food. The Top Cat plan put 50 million to work. That sounds pretty good. That will never leave to China making that. That sounds very good, Terry. If the Congress members believe we are going independent instead of the two-party system, where both paths lead to the same slaughterhouse. Yeah, if they believe we're going independent, and by the way, that application I talked about today, the meta layer, would mean that people would be going independent. Certainly independent of the two bozo parties we have now. Terry says independentcongress.com, posted on January 5th, 2020 by Terry. Nothing needs invented. We have all the ingredients now. You can have the best ideas in the whole world. We had to wait for one soul brother murdered on TV in the toilet paper wars. Timing is so right on right now. 2012, John Nicholson, Citizens Committee for Restructured Government, ccrg.info. After he had read the Top Cat plan, he realized we needed to work together. If we do not plant hemp, I'm for planting hemp in massive amounts. We agree about that. We will see one half humanity within a single decade. PirateRadioUSA.net. I don't know if that will happen, but I agree with you about planting hemp in massive amounts. That's a great idea. Barbara says, yes, but did you see these people this week? I know these people. How do we penetrate this? How do we penetrate this obsession? I don't think we're going to penetrate it, but I think if the Biden administration gets on the stick and starts providing a Green New Deal with a job guarantee and Medicare for all for people and gets these people busy, I think doing things for people and making it clear the government is acting in the interest of the people is what's going to penetrate this obsession that these people have. For the present, though, the only solution to this obsession is going to be to watch out for armed kinds of dissent and to take care of that with a very heavy hand, to enforce the law. Okay, in other words, while doing something, not something, but while treating the underlying causes in a very vigorous way. If that's done, this will all be over. If both of those things are done, this will all be over within a year to two. By the election of 2022, Biden could be a hero if he plays this right, or he could be an asshole and the Republicans could come back. Don't ask me where I'm placing my money. Evelina says, also, the referendums are useful. We ought to demand those. And Kay says, there you are, Evelina Pont, glad to see you. And Carmen Rena says, open society sounds so refreshing, Kay, and beautiful. Carmen says, adapt or die. Yeah, that's it, adapt or die. Just learned another cousin has passed due to COVID-19, says Steve Gonzo. Rest in peace, Johnny. Sorry to hear that, Steve. Kay says, sorry to hear that, Steve. Carmina says, integration? What's integration? And Barbara Warnick says, what's imminent that should be addressed first. And also Dolores says, so sorry for the loss of your cousins. Carmen says, dear Lord, and gives hugs. Evelyn says, that sounds like a threat. Laugh out loud. Sandy Dakes says, so sorry for your loss. Carmen says, go on, I'm an abstract thinker. Carmen says, Prometheus gave man fire. Yes, and got punished for it, having his liver eaten by vultures continuously. And radio station WIFM, what's in it for me? And Barbara says, the shit libs. And Carmen Muniz says, boomers don't like that. Barbara says, no, control them. They did. Lana Dell says, fascinating stuff. Thank you, Lana. And Kay says, not all boomers are the same, Carmen. And Carmen says, if it doesn't apply to you, then Carmen then says, if it doesn't apply to you, don't bark. And then Carmen says, if it doesn't apply to you, don't bark the loudest. Kay says, not barking, just saying. I know I'm not a normal boomer, laugh out loud. Barbara says, ageism, a thing with millennials. Yeah. Kay says, I'm an old hippie, laugh out loud. And Carmen says, progressives see the gay area and don't dwell in the land of extremism. Carmen says, laugh out loud, gray area, damn autocorrect again. Carmen says, cognitive dissonance. Independent left says, hi friends, hi independent. And Sugar says, but the Russiagate narrative supports the war machine. The establishment has been red baiting since the 50s. Sandy Deck says, I'm a late boomer. I am at the end. Kay says, the DNC don't care about winning. I'm a pre-boomer. Don't care about winning or losing as long as they keep their donors, money, and power. Yeah, we're going to have to take those away from them too. Because one thing that the system I described is going to do is disempower the money. Because you'll be able to get the attention of your representatives without the money. Carmen says, they even give the $1,200 EIP funds credit to Adolf. Evelina says, and that's the bottom line, Evelina says. I know all too well, Evelina. Carmen says, that's why we have to use as much stealth as possible. Steve says, oh, what do you mean submit to you people, laugh out loud. Kay says, if Biden doesn't move left a lot, I'm about done with Dems. Barbara says, looting, the word of the day. Carmen says, Bernie was our, quote, open state, so to speak. Yeah, he was. Kay says, I voted Bernie in the primaries and was not going to vote for Biden, but he talked about expanding SS, so I gave him a chance. Yeah, I'll probably expand it by $200 a month. He's a real big spender, that guy. And Kay says, I was very unhappy with Bernie when he dropped out. I'm still unhappy with him for dropping out. Really unhappy.
Me too.
Carmen says, and Bonnie says, me too. Carmen says, that means no more intellectual laziness. Even when it's staying on the edge of chaos without falling into the state of chaos is something like rocking the boat continuously without tipping over. I like that. Yeah, the edge of chaos is a nice metaphor used in complex adaptive systems. Yes.
Was Bernie starting a meta layer when he started his thing to organize people?
He would be trying to do that, but he doesn't have the information technology sophistication to have pursued that.
Okay. They don't know what
Okay.
it is.
In other words, he was trying to do that. If his situation had worked, he would have been able to generate something of a meta layer, but nothing like what could be generated if he had backed an endeavor, like actually building the meta layer.
Okay.
Barbara Werner says, ask actual workers. Steve Gunter says, Trump won't even lower flags for slain officer even on Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. Independent Left says, would the military-industrial complex be part of the interest groups in your slide about your proposed platform? Well, they could join, okay, as individuals. Then they'd have to, form some voting blocks that would favor that kind of agenda. But they'd have problems. And the problems would be that most people wouldn't be interested in that particular kind of agenda. So they would have to craft a very broad agenda with their agenda, okay, as part of that. And they would have to be prepared to compromise with people, okay, from other voting groups. But the military-industrial complex as corporates would not be able to take part in the platform. They would not have a place in it. No, not at all. Now, military people, as citizens, would certainly be able to join. It would be open. Actually, it would be open to citizens, okay, and to non-citizens. It would be open, okay, to everybody. But it's in particular a web-based platform for voters. Okay. Okay, but non-voters could certainly communicate on it and contribute to problem solving in various ways. Kay says, I'll be so glad when he's gone. Carmen said, I say develop the television blocking technology to snap people out of CNN types propaganda programming, but again, it requires stealth. Indy Left says government allocation would also factor in that right side of the slide too. Absolutely it would, yes, in the right side of the slide. And so that would be affected by the effects of the left side of the slide as the meta layer began to emerge. Carmen said, heard he isn't dead? Who? Who he? Evelina says, yeah, if alternative media is allowed to thrive. I laugh out loud. Censorship is a possibility. It isn't a possibility in this particular platform if the platform is formulated in the way we envision by particular groups of people that would have a vested interest in keeping the platform going without content censorship. What I mean by content censorship is censorship, okay, of ideas, and censorship, okay, of facts, censorship of substance. There might be on this platform with what some might speak of as baton policing, basically requiring civil communications, by civil communications among people in the platform. But it's possible that it wouldn't even require that. In other words, we might leave rules like that up to the individual voting blocks. If some voting blocks wanted to require civil communications operating according to civil communication rules, which is what I would advise in the particular voting blocks, those voting blocks are likely to grow a lot faster than voting blocks that do not employ civil communications. And therefore, in essentially, okay, an ecological system where the fittest would survive through competition, the fittest voting blocks would be those where the people have a modicum of trust, okay, in each other. And that would be most facilitated by civil communications. So the authoritarian voting blocks, I don't think would grow as fast as the voting blocks characterized by civil communication and good substance. In other words, civil communication alone is not enough. I think a voting block has to have problem-solving substance, okay, as well. Has to be adaptive if it's going to survive. Kay says, we all need bows, arrows, and mockingbirds. And Kay says, the progressive media needs to get together and make a news TV like free speech TV. No, it doesn't. That's just mass media. And Carmen Muniz says jabber jays. In other words, we've basically got that already. It's something like TYT or something. Carmen Muniz says jabber jays. Kay says, I really like Jacobin on YouTube. Yeah, I do too. Jacobin's good. And Evelina Putty says, problem is people don't own this technology, so it can easily be taken away or restricted. Well, yeah, maybe. We'd have to set up the ownership in such a way that people would own it. It can be set up in that way so that people who participate would come to own stock in the organization. That, in other words, people would be awarded stock from the bottom up. We would have to make this a cooperative in the end. Kay says, free speech TV, and by the way, okay, a cooperative whose bylaws would simply prohibit sales to anyone. Kay says, free speech TV has been online for many years. Kay and his viewers support it. That's good. Kay says, Thom Hartmann. Oh, yeah, that's Thom Hartmann's thing. Yeah, free speech TV is Thom Hartmann's. Yeah. So you want free speech TV. What are you asking for, Kay? I'm sorry, I didn't actually recognize that. Needs to get together and make a news TV like free speech TV. But I thought that free speech TV was progressive. And Tom says, Tom's been saying for a long time that we need a radio network, okay, for progressive news too, like the right-wing hate networks all over. Yeah, we probably can use one of those. Carmen says, I like that accessible information technology idea. Carmen says, how about opposing party hackers? Well, okay, the design for this calls for quantum encryption. So there's unlikely to be any party hacking, okay, because you can't break by quantum encoding by any hacker technologies known in this particular universe. Kay says, we need definitely more parties. Carmen says, I'm getting droopy-eyed. Carmen says, Barney, you still here? Carmen Eunice says, quantum physics. And Carmen says, land. Carmen says, it'll pay for itself. And Jerry Bias says, Bernie Sanders ain't nothing but a socialist. It will never happen. Listen, don't throw the socialist thing around here, because we don't believe in socialist and we don't believe in capitalist. We just believe in solving problems, Jerry. If you got a bias and it's an anti-socialist bias, you really don't need to be here. Carmen Mina says, will it shoot out lasers to zap the maggots, JK? Carmen says, yes, stimulating, most definitely. Kay says, Bernie could be the most important politician now if he chooses to use it. I sure hope he does. Carmen says, Pence already felt betrayed by Adolf because he certified Biden and Adolf scorned him for it. Carmen says, the Klan staged it, could be. And Lana says, I also just read the GOP governor of Maryland offered state police support and was turned away, yes, on Wednesday. That was for the National Guard. It was for National Guard troops, state-based National Guard troops from Larry Hogan. And he was initially turned away. He said he was turned away for over an hour. Okay, and Dolores says Tim Canova was in D.C. January 6th. Yeah, but where was he making a speech? Kay says, by Dolores, he isn't going right-wing now, is he? And so Laura says, many Bernie Sanders supporters, independents, election integrity activists were in D.C. along with Tim and spoke at the event. There were people at the event that were not Trump supporters. So there's your answer. Okay, it wasn't the Trump event. And Carmen says, Florida reported that many GOP went nonpartisan and independent already. Kay says they have in Ohio too, Carmen. And Dolores says, Tim Canova is still independent and very concerned about election integrity. I'm very concerned about election integrity too, you betcha. Absolutely. Anybody who was paying attention in the primaries last year, the Democratic primaries, has to be concerned about election integrity. Kay says, good, I liked him. Okay, so Lana says, if you want to know what Tim C has been saying, I encourage you all to read through his Twitter postings. Thank you, Lana. I haven't looked in on Tim for some time, so I'm sure I should do that. Biden wants the 1,400 to be sent out remaining over from the initial 2,000 off the top after the inauguration, but Manchin objecting vehemently already. Yeah, Manchin, is objecting, but he's backed off of the objection, a little, saying he wants it to be better targeted, but maybe Biden can give him some language that it can make it seem that it's better targeted. So he's able to save face and BS his way, into voting for it. I personally think the pressure will be so heavy on him to vote for it that if he doesn't vote for it, he can forget about running in 2024. I mean, 40% of his constituents are in poverty, starving, lacking rent. He can't say no to a $2,000 check for them. He'd be a total moron if he did. Kay says Joe Manchin needs to go, and Dolores Pierce says about Lana Dell. I've been following Tim Canova's Twitter. I've watched him as a guest on many shows, speaking about his experience in the primaries. I've watched him a lot on that too, and I'm well aware of what he thinks, in that area, and I respect his views. I think that he's an expert in that area, a bona fide expert. He's one of the people I would listen to about what's going on in that area. Lana says, I think Tim has gone off the rails a little, but I like him, and I hope I am wrong. I think Tim's a pretty rigorous thinker, and I think he's honest. I doubt that he's gone off the rails, maybe a little with respect to the focus of it. Carmen says the Capitol cop is not dead. And Carmen says, yeah, he sounded nuts, the last time I heard him. Carmen Muniz, I don't want to carry it that far, but I think the absolute horrid experience of him going against the witch, W.W. Schultz, has really affected him. He went twice against her, not once, and was cheated both times. Yeah, twice. Kay says DWS needs to go. And Lana says, yes, Kay, she is another two. Now, she won over Perelman also. I don't know what's wrong with the people in her district. Carmen says, like in Collective Commons, I think it's called. Lana says, Dr. Joe, that's what Ramona Masacci wants to do, have our own media. Well, we would have our own media in this application. The voting blocks would have their own media. That's the point. They'd be generating their own media all the time. That's one of the points. That's why we can disintermediate, is what we call it, the mass media, because we'd be developing our own media within the platform. Anthony throws a clover leaf in. Kate Clark says, free speech TV is progressive to a point, but Tom Hartman is the only one I watch there. If the YouTube the progressives did a similar thing, it would be a great thing. So, Kay, that may be what's happening over, at Rockfin, that they're trying to do that there. There are a number of folks like the Convo Couch, Nico House, and some of their allies that have gone to Rockfin, and are working there. And I don't know what it would take to actually create a network from that point, but they're already on one particular platform, because that platform is much more open to them than some of the other platforms are. But obviously they have to stay on the other platform, because there are not enough people on Rockfin yet to allow them to support themselves. So Terry Cook says, so we live in our nation's most ungreen state. Only 220 farmers with the balls to grow hemp last year. By Richard, by Robol, who's a retired Harvard attorney. I went to the Ohio State Ag meeting to context the rules governing the growing of hemp. We were the first two to speak for 3 minutes each to not allow Monsanto as a registered seed provider and 0.3% THC to 5%. My wife, 50 years, Jane Cook, told me it would be a wasted effort. And she was right, as usual. The Top Cat plan ccrg.info, go JNN. I'm going to look in on topcatplan.com, Terry. Rahul Majumdar says, celebrity politicians who fail to serve their working class constituents are also a stain on a nation. Yes, big stain. An independent left says they rig her district, fraction magic. I know they do, indie left. Joanne Schaffer Mishlik says, Facebook Senator McDaniel, and leaves a link to Ronna McDaniel, I guess that is, right? Is she a senator? I thought she was in the House. Terry Cook says, in what way? I am a Tim Canova fan for the last 5 years. Yeah, I have to say I'm a Tim Canova fan too. He used to come on my shows, okay, when I was with RP. We would have 3 and 4 hour shows. In fact, the most attended show I ever had was with Tim Canova, actually. Got an enormous amount of views for that show. Anyway, Carmen says, Cheeto wants to start his own social media. Kay says, Terry Cook, I agree. Ohio sucks too many ways. Terry Cook says, independentcongress.com, posted on January 5th, 2021 by Terry. Nothing needs invented. We have all the ingredients now. That's what you said before, Terry, so I'll just let you repeat that. And Indie Left says, I own a Rockfin crypto token. It's flying. And Solana says, sorry, Terry, I'm not going to read through all of that. Steve Gonzo says, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. opens murder investigation into the death of fallen U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. 3 law enforcement sources confirmed to ABC News. And Solana says, my comment about Tim is not intended to be mean-spirited. He said a thing or two in PM to me that I don't feel comfortable typing here. As I said, I liked Tim. Okay, and Dolores says, Tim Canova provided information to those investigating the general election, does communicate, okay, with MAGA people. He communicates with those who will listen. It would be nice to have him on the show again. I'd love to have Tim on the show. If you think, Dolores, that we could get at least 40 people on here to have an interview with him, I'd be happy to do it. The only reason why I've not invited him but for an interview, because, I have a small audience. And frankly, I don't want to waste his time. I think he's probably looking for bigger audiences. And we're still too small. That's why I don't invite, too many more people on. It's out of consideration for them. It's not because I like to do every single show by myself. I like to talk to other people. And Carmen says, good show tonight. Deep stuff. Thank you, Carmen. And Rahul Majumdar says, take a look. I'm not impressed. With what, Rahul? With what are you not impressed? Okay. So, thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. I think it's about time. Steve says, ours would pursue DWS, even with Tim's evidence. Yeah, I know, because they like to have DWS there. And Raul says, election integrity goes beyond specific results. Yes, it does. But I think Tim's evidence is beyond specific results. And Carmen says, I don't know why our audience is so small. I invite and share every time. Yeah, I don't know either. I know you're inviting and sharing. I mean, I know we're getting shares. Like, there are some times when I have enough shares on here, okay, that, in days, okay, I was on RP and I would get the same number of shares. I mean, I'd be running, 6,000 views or something like that, or 7,000 views. I mean, but these days I'm getting the same number of shares. I'm lucky if I get, 400 or 500 views. So I'm sure it's Facebook that they've been repressing these types, okay, of live streams, and that's what, okay, I'm running into. I can see they're repressing us, okay, in various ways, but that doesn't change the fact that if I want to get somebody on here who's prominent and they have a chance to go on shows where they've got 100, 200 people watching, it's almost an insult to invite them here. I mean, I feel ashamed about it. I'll tell you. And Indy Letts says Night Joe. And Kay says you invite others and both viewers grow. Yeah, but if we're so small to begin with, is it really worth their time? So Kay says, thank you for a great, Dwight Lewis says, urgent Trump train news media videos. Okay. And Kay says, thank you for another great discussion. I love you all. And Carmen says, yep, Joe, fascist book is suppressing progressives as always, but they sure love brunch Democrats. I guess they do. Guess I'm not a brunch Democrat. That's it. Anyway, thanks for staying so long. This is real good attendance tonight for this late. Thank you very much for sharing. And Rahul says this isn't the place to boost a failing Trump legacy. That is certainly correct. This is not the place to boost Trump in any way, manner, shape, or form. Kay says, you ask and they decide. And Dolores says, thank you for a great discussion. Thank you for coming, Dolores, and thank you for your contributions, okay, as well. I treasure them. Thank you, everyone, and good night.